At 68 years old, Colonel Grace Bennett thought her flying days were over until a historic flood trapped 12 civilians in a collapsing canyon. With the military grounded by the storm, only one pilot has the experience to attempt the impossible. The emergency alert buzzed at 3:17 a.m., jolting Colonel Grace Bennett awake. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she grabbed the secure phone, a relic from her 40-year Air Force career she'd never quite abandoned. "Colonel, we need you at Fort Carson immediately." The voice belonged to General Marie Carter, her former protege now running Mountain Rescue Command. Historic flooding in Phantom Canyon. 12 civilians trapped, all active pilots are grounded by the storm. Grace's arthritis flared as she swung her legs out of bed, but her mind was already calculating 100-mile winds, vertical rock walls, flash flood surge patterns. She'd pioneered canyon rescues during the '95 monsoons, back when her call sign Stormchaser meant something. The base Humvee arrived as Grace was clizzing her combat boots, her retired uniform hanging loose on her thinning frame. At the operations center, young pilots stared as she entered, this silver-haired woman moving with the authority of someone who'd flown missions before they were born. "We've got one asset." General Carter pointed to a holographic display of an experimental M60 dubbed Silver Fox. "Enhanced stability systems, but no pilot qualified to fly it in these conditions." Grace studied the storm data with eyes that had seen worse in Vietnam. "You're looking at 30-minute windows between microbursts. I can get in during the third lull." A junior officer scoffed. "Ma'am, with respect, that aircraft requires I help design its flight systems." "Lieutenant," Grace interrupted, slipping on her faded leather gloves, "while you were learning to shave." General Carter hesitated, then slid over the mission folder. "Orders say we wait for weather clearance." Grace met her gaze. "Marie, how many body bags do you want to fill today?" The room fell silent. Outside, rain lashed the tarmac as Grace walked toward the waiting helicopter, its rotors beginning to turn. At 68, she'd outlived 3 husbands and buried 2 children. But the storm still called, and Grace Bennett always answered. Phantom Canyon roared like a living beast as Grace guided Silver Fox through the storm's teeth. Below, floodwaters churned with the remnants of herbs and picnic tables, cruel reminders this had been a campground hours earlier. "Contacting survivors now," called Tech Sergeant Luis Rivera, her longtime crew chief who'd volunteered despite his bad knee. The radio crackled with desperate voices. "Grandma, the water's rising. My boy can't swim." Grace's heart clenched. She heard these same terrified tones in Hurricane Katrina's aftermath. "Marking positions," Rivera said as their thermal imaging lit up with 12 heat signatures clinging to a crumbling rock ledge. Grace banked hard, evading a wind shear that would have shattered lesser aircraft. "Silver Fox to base, requesting immediate extract authorization." The reply came too fast. "Negative, wind gusts exceed safety limits." Rivera muttered a Spanish curse. "They're going to die waiting for perfect weather." Grace tightened her grip on the controls, remembering her daughter's last words before the car accident: "Be someone's miracle." "Mom." Below, a section of the leech collapsed, taking 2 figures into the maelstrom. "Screw authorization." Grace plunged Silver Fox downward, its experimental thrusters whining in protest. Rivera, prep the rescue basket. The canyon walls closed around them like stone jaws as Grace performed the maneuver that made her famous, flying sideways to create rotor wash that pushed survivors against the rock face rather than blasting them off. "First basket going down," Rivera shouted, but as the cable unreeled, Grace spotted something the instruments hadn't: an entire mountainside sliding toward the remaining survivors. Nature's fury versus an old woman's stubbornness. The real battle had just begun. Grace's hands moved with muscle memory honed through decades of crisis as Silver Fox danced between falling boulders. Rivera, hard left. The crew chief yanked the rescue basket sideways just as a truck-sized rock smashed their previous position. Survivors screamed below, their voices swallowed by the canyon's roar. Silver Fox to base, landslides blocking extraction. No response came, their communications array damaged by hail. Grace eyed the collapsing terrain with a pilot's cold calculus. "We've got 90 seconds before that entire slope goes." Rivera's face paled. "We need to pull out, not without them." Grace activated the experimental terrain hug system, feeling Silver Fox shudder as it locked onto the disintegrating cliff face. The aircraft skimmed sideways mere feet from the rocks, Grace's arthritic fingers making micro adjustments younger pilots couldn't match. Below, a white-haired woman clutched 2 children, her rain-scoped blouse flapping like a surrender flag. "Basket stuck," Rivera shouted as debris jammed the mechanism. Grace didn't hesitate. "I'm going down." She unhooked her harness before Rivera could protest. "Hold her steady, Chief." Using skills from long ago grapple training, Grace descended the vibrating cable into hell. Wind tore at her uniform, but her hands, those legendary hands that had flown wounded soldiers from Da Nang, remained steady. The grandmother thrust the children upward. "Take them first." Grace secured the sobbing boy with one arm, the girl with the other, and screamed. "Now." Rivera reeled them up as the cliff erupted below. Grace watched the grandmother's face recede, mouthing thank you before the landslide consumed her. Back in the cabin, Grace held the trembling children close. "We're not done yet," she told Rivera. 9 souls remained in the canyon's jaws. Silver Fox's fuel warning blared as Grace spotted the remaining survivors, a huddled group clinging to an isolated pine tree halfway up the collapsing canyon wall. "They're in the death zone," Rivera warned. Grace knew the term well, that altitude where rotor wash could dislodge the very handholds people clung to. Her knees protested as she stood in the vibrating cabin, studying the storm through ancient pilot's eyes. "See that updraft?" She pointed to a nearly invisible ripple in the rain. "We ride that like an elevator." Rivera looked ill. "That's a tornado vortex signature." "Exactly." Grace engaged Silver Fox's experimental vortex stabilization system, her own design, never tested in combat conditions. The helicopter trembled violently as she steered into the twisting air column. Survivors screamed below as the tree's roots began pulling free. "Now!" Grace shouted. The vortex lifted them perfectly alongside the cliff, rotors inches from stone. Rivera deployed baskets and harnesses with frantic precision. 7 aboard, 5 to go. A teenage boy froze mid-reach. Paralyzed by fear, Grace did what no flight manual recommended. She killed the engines. Silver Fox dropped like a stone, giving the boy something stable to jump toward. Rivera caught him as Grace restarted the turbines mere yards above the raging flood. The final 4 survivors leapt aboard as their perch disintegrated. "All clear," Rivera yelled. But Grace's celebration died as warning lights lit the console. The storm had won its pound of flesh. Silver Fox's tail rotor was failing, with 12 civilians crammed in the cabin and a damaged aircraft. Grace faced her hardest calculation yet: escape route versus remaining fuel. Grace guided the shuddering Silver Fox into the storm's upper reaches, trading altitude for distance like she'd done in '82 over the Persian Gulf. "Fuel critical," Rivera warned, but Grace was already plotting their path, a forgotten miner's road visible only on her mental map of the region. The boy she'd saved clutched her leg, his tears soaking into her flight suit. "Are we going to die?" Grace smiled with a warmth that surprised her. "Not today, sweetheart." She nursed the failing helicopter through apocalyptic winds, using every trick from her storied career. When the second engine failed, she glided silently like the owl gracing her squadron patch. When the road appeared through the rain, it was lined with military vehicles and one furious General Carter. Grace sat down with her signature feather touch as medics swarmed the survivors. Carter stormed over as Grace's knees finally buckled. "You disobeyed direct orders." Grace met her glare unflinching, "and 11 people are alive because of it." The general's stern mask cracked. "Damn it, Grace. Your hands." Only then did Grace notice her bleeding knuckles, tendons visible through torn skin. Rivera helped her stand before the assembled press. 12 went into that canyon, a reporter shouted. "You saved 11. Grace's voice carried over the storm's aftermath. "The 12th was a hero who gave those children to me." Some rescues aren't about numbers. 3 weeks later, Grace sat in the Pentagon briefing room as they unveiled the new Bennett protocol, emergency procedures blending veteran intuition with new technology. The boy she'd saved placed a model Silver Fox on her lap. "When I grow up," he whispered, "I want to fly like you." Grace's arthritic hand ruffled his hair. "Kid, you already do." Outside, thunder rumbled, another storm calling, another generation ready to answer.